My name's Pamela, and up until recently, I was just your average workaholic advertising specialist. I lived and breathed my job at this fancy agency in the heart of the city. You know the type, big glass building, top floor office with a view that'd make your head spin. I was good at what I did, damn good actually. The agency relied on me for pretty much everything. I was your typical career-focused woman in her early 30s. No husband, no kids, just me and my work. My tiny apartment was more like a pit stop between office hours than an actual home. I'd roll in late at night, crash for a few hours, then head right back out. Rinse and repeat. My boss, well, she was something else. Picture a 60-something woman with more ambition than empathy. She owned the agency, and boy, did she let everyone know it. Her name was Vivian, but we all called her Mrs. Crawford behind her back. To her face? It was all yes, ma'am, and right away, ma'am. One particular Monday morning, I dragged myself into the office, feeling like death warmed over. I'd caught some nasty bug over the weekend, but deadlines wait for no one, especially not in Vivian's world. I was hunched over my computer, trying to focus on the quarterly report through my fever haze, when Vivian's voice cut through the office like a knife. Pamela, my office, now. I stumbled to her door, knowing full well what was coming. The report was late, and Vivian Crawford did not do late. What the hell is this? She snarled, waving a printout in my face. You call this a report? Any 5-year-old could put together something more coherent than this garbage. I'm sorry, Ms. Crawford, I mumbled, my head pounding. I've been sick, Anne. Sick? She scoffed. You think clients care if you're sick? You think I built this agency by taking sick days? You're useless, Pamela. Utterly useless. Her words hit me like a slap. I'd poured my heart and soul into this job for years, sacrificed everything for it. And this was what I got in return? I don't know if it was the fever or just years of pent-up frustration, but something in me snapped. Tears welled up in my eyes, and before I knew it, I was bolting out of her office, past the shocked faces of my coworkers, and into the elevator. The elevator dinged, and as the door slid open, I came face to face with a pair of concerned brown eyes. Hey, are you okay? A deep voice asked. I looked up, startled by the voice. Standing there was a man about my age, with kind eyes and a concerned expression. I must have looked a sight, because his brow furrowed even deeper when he saw my face. I'm fine, I stammered, trying to regain my composure. But the tears betrayed me, streaming down my cheeks. You don't look fine, he said gently. Look, I know it's none of my business, but, would you like to grab a coffee? Sometimes talking to a stranger can help. I hesitated. I never did things like this, running out of work, crying in elevators, accepting invitations from strangers. But something about his genuine concern broke through my defenses. Actually, I sniffled, that sounds nice. We made our way to a little cafe just down the street. As we sat down with our coffees, he introduced himself as Jake. So, he said, settling into his chair, want to tell me what's got you so upset? I found myself pouring out the whole story, how I'd been feeling ill, how I was behind on my work, and how my boss had torn into me. I was careful not to mention any names or specifics about the company, but I didn't hold back on describing how devastated I felt. Wow, Jake said when I finished. That's rough. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially when they're sick. We ended up talking for over an hour. Jake told me about his own job in finance, his hobbies, his dog. It was easy, comfortable conversation, and I found myself laughing, despite the awful morning I'd had. As we were getting ready to leave, Jake hesitated. Listen, Pamela. I know we just met, but I'd really like to see you again. Maybe we could grab dinner sometime? I surprised myself by saying yes without hesitation. We exchanged numbers, and as I watched him walk away, I felt a flutter of excitement in my chest. Over the next few weeks, Jake and I started seeing each other regularly. We'd meet for dinner after work, or spend weekends exploring the city. With each date, I found myself falling harder for him. He was kind, funny, and supportive, everything I'd been missing in my life. At work, things were, well, they were what they always were. Vivian was still Vivian, demanding and critical. But somehow, it didn't bother me as much anymore. Knowing I had Jake to talk to at the end of the day made it all more bearable. One night, about a year after we'd met, Jake took me to a fancy restaurant. As we finished our dessert, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. "Pamela, will you marry me?" Happy tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded enthusiastically. Yes, of course I'll marry you." As Jake slipped the ring on my finger, I felt like I was floating on air. Everything was perfect. Jake was perfect. Our life together would be perfect. The weeks following our engagement were a whirlwind of happiness. One evening, as we cuddled on the couch in my apartment, Jake brought up something I hadn't even considered. "Babe," he said, running his fingers through my hair, "I think it's time you met my mom. She's been asking to meet you. How about this weekend? We can drive out to her place." That Saturday, we pulled up to a house that made my jaw drop. It was huge, easily 3 times the size of the house I grew up in. The door swung open, and I froze. Standing there, looking just as shocked as I felt, was Vivian Crawford, my boss, Jake's mother. "Mom," Jake said warmly, oblivious to the tension, "this is Pamela, my fiancée." Vivian's eyes narrowed as they swept over me. "Pamela," she said, her voice cold. "What a surprise." "Jake, darling, surely you can do better than this." She waved her hand dismissively in my direction. "With your money, your position, you could have any woman you want. Why settle for someone from such a modest background?" I felt like I'd been slapped. Jake's arm tightened around me. "Mom," he said, his voice hard, "I love Pamela. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm marrying her, with or without your approval." Vivian's face darkened, but Jake didn't give her a chance to respond. He turned to me, his eyes softening. "I'm so sorry about this, Pam. Let's go." As we drove away, I finally found my voice. "Jake," I said shakily, "there's something I need to tell you." I spilled everything, how Vivian was my boss, how she'd treated me at work, the incident that led to me meeting Jake in the first place. Jake listened silently, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When I finished, he pulled the car over and turned to face me. "Pamela," he said firmly, "I want you to know that this changes nothing. I love you, and I'm on your side, no matter what." His words were like a lifeline, and I clung to them desperately. We decided to move forward with our wedding plans, despite Vivian's disapproval. Jake and I found a small apartment together, and for a while, everything seemed okay. But at work, things were getting worse. Vivian's treatment of me had always been harsh, but now it was downright cruel. She'd humiliate me in meetings, mock my ideas in front of clients, and pile on impossible deadlines. Yet she never fired me. I was too valuable to the agency, and we both knew it. I'd come home every night exhausted and demoralized. Jake was always there, supportive and loving, but I could see the toll it was taking on him too. He'd confront his mother, begging her to treat me better, but it only seemed to make things worse. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I'd been working on a massive presentation for weeks, pouring every ounce of creativity and effort I had into it. As I stood in front of the management team, including Vivian, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time I'd finally earn her approval. I was halfway through my pitch when Vivian's cold voice cut through the room. "Is this a joke, Pamela? This is what you've been working on for weeks? This is amateur work at best. I've seen interns produce better concepts than this drivel." The room fell silent. I could feel the pitying looks from my colleagues, but no one dared to speak up against Vivian. "I can revise it," I stammered, fighting back tears. Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Don't bother. We'll have someone competent handle it from here. You're dismissed." I fled the conference room, my cheeks burning with humiliation. As soon as I reached my desk, I broke down in tears. It was too much. The constant criticism, the public humiliation, the stress of navigating this impossible situation with my mother-in-law. I couldn't take it anymore. That evening, I stumbled into our apartment, still sniffling. Jake took one look at me and pulled me into a tight hug. "That's it," he said firmly. "You can't keep doing this to yourself, Pam. You need to quit. Your mental health is more important than any job." The next day, I marched into Vivian's office and handed in my resignation. Her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little thing," she sputtered. "After everything this agency has done for you? You're just going to abandon us?" I stood my ground, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm sorry, but I can't continue working in this environment. My last day will be in 2 weeks." As I turned to leave, Vivian's voice stopped me cold. "You think you can just walk away? I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. You'll regret this, Pamela. Mark my words." I threw myself into job hunting, confident that my skills and experience would land me a new position quickly. But as the weeks turned into months, I started to worry. Every promising lead seemed to fizzle out at the last minute. It was as if someone was sabotaging my efforts. Finally, after nearly 6 months of searching, I landed a job at a smaller agency. It wasn't as prestigious as my old position, but I was grateful for the opportunity. As I settled into my new role, I began to feel like things were finally looking up. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as I was starting to feel secure in my new job, my boss called me into his office. The moment I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. "Pamela," he said, his voice heavy with regret, "I'm afraid we have to let you go. Your work has been excellent. It's just, well, I can't say more, but my hands are tied. I'm sorry." As I packed up my desk in a daze, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Vivian. "How does unemployment feel, dear? Perhaps now you'll learn your place." In that moment, I realized the true extent of my mother-in-law's vindictiveness. She hadn't just threatened to ruin my career, she was actually doing it. The following months were a blur of anxiety and frustration. No matter how many resumes I sent out or interviews I went to, I couldn't seem to land a job. I started picking up freelance gigs just to make ends meet, but it was barely enough to cover our bills. One afternoon, as I sat at our kitchen table, scrolling through job listings I knew would lead nowhere, my phone rang. It was Vivian. My finger hovered over the decline button, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Pamela, dear," Vivian's saccharine voice oozed through the speaker. "I just thought I'd check in on my favorite daughter-in-law. You know, Jake's birthday is coming up soon." I froze. In all the chaos of the past few months, I'd completely forgotten about Jake's birthday. "I was thinking," Vivian continued, her voice suddenly warm, "why don't we surprise him? We could throw a party at my house. All his friends, family, it would be lovely, don't you think? It's time we put our differences aside, don't you think? Jake'd be so happy to see us getting along." As much as I wanted to refuse, I couldn't deny that Jake would love to see his mother and wife reconcile. And after everything he'd done for me, didn't he deserve a special birthday? "All right," I said hesitantly. "What did you have in mind?" Vivian's voice brightened. "Wonderful. Why don't you come over early on the day of the party? We can set everything up together. It'll be our little secret from Jake." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The day of the party arrived, and I made my way to Vivian's house, my stomach in knots. As I approached the front door, I could hear voices and laughter inside. As I stepped inside, I was shocked to see the house already full of guests. Vivian's phone was in her hand, apparently live streaming the event. "Everyone," Vivian announced loudly, her eyes gleaming with malice, "I'd like you all to greet our help for the evening." Before I could process what was happening, Vivian thrust a maid's uniform into my hands. "Here you go, dear. The kitchen's that way. Chop chop, these guests won't serve themselves." I stood there, stunned, as the room fell silent. All eyes were on me, a mix of pity and second-hand embarrassment on their faces. "What's the matter?" Vivian sneered, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "This is what you're suited for, isn't it? A girl from the slums, parents who worked in a factory. You should be grateful I'm giving you the opportunity to serve your betters." The humiliation was overwhelming. Tears pricked at my eyes as I looked around the room, desperately searching for a friendly face, for someone to stand up to this cruelty. But everyone averted their gaze, unwilling to challenge Vivian. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'd endured months of Vivian's torment, but this was a step too far. Without a word, I dropped the uniform at Vivian's feet and stormed out of the house, ignoring her calls behind me. I burst into our apartment, a mess of tears and anger. Jake was there, getting ready to head to his mother's house. He took one look at me, and his face fell. When I told him everything, Jake's face paled. He grabbed his phone and quickly pulled up his mother's social media page. There it was, the video of my humiliation, already gaining views and nasty comments. Jake's hands shook as he watched the video. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the love for his mother warring with his love for me. But as Vivian's cruel words rang out from the phone speakers, his jaw set in determination. He dialed Vivian's number, putting the phone on speaker. When she answered, her voice was sickly sweet. "Jake, darling, where are you? Everyone's waiting." "Save it, Mom," Jake cut her off. "I saw the video. How could you do that to Pamela?" There was a pause, then Vivian's voice turned cold. "Oh please, Jake. I was just putting her in her place. You know she's not good enough for you. I was doing you a favor." "No, Mom," Jake interrupted again. "You weren't doing me any favors. You were being cruel and manipulative. I love Pamela, and I won't let you treat her like this anymore. We're done. Don't contact us again." He hung up before Vivian could respond. The silence in our apartment was deafening. Jake turned to me, his eyes soft. "I'm so sorry, Pam. I had no idea she would go this far." I fell into his arms, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. We spent the rest of the evening together, ignoring the constant ringing of Jake's phone. It was only the next morning that we realized the full extent of Vivian's retaliation. Jake's boss called him in for an emergency meeting. When he returned home a few hours later, his face was ashen. "They fired me," he said, his voice hollow. "Apparently, the CEO is a close friend of my mother's. She asked him to let me go." We spent the next few days trying to figure out our next move. With both of us unemployed and Vivian's influence seemingly everywhere, our options felt limited. "Maybe," Jake said hesitantly one evening, "maybe we should consider moving. Start fresh somewhere else, away from my mother's influence." The idea was tempting, but something nagged at me. "Jake," I said slowly, "why did your parents get divorced? You've never really talked about it." Jake's face clouded over. "I don't really know the details. Mom always said Dad abandoned us, that he didn't want anything to do with me. Dad tried to contact me a few times when I was younger, but Mom always intercepted the calls, told me he was just trying to manipulate us." An idea started to form in my mind. "Jake, what if we reached out to your dad? Maybe he could shed some light on all of this." We arranged to meet Jake's father, Robert, at a quiet cafe the next day. As we walked in, I spotted an older man who bore a striking resemblance to Jake. His face lit up when he saw us, and he stood to greet us with a warm, if slightly awkward, hug for Jake. "You must be Pamela," he said, turning to me with a kind smile. "It's wonderful to meet you." As we settled in with our coffees, Robert's face grew serious. "Jake, I can't tell you how happy I am to hear from you. But I have a feeling this isn't just a social call. What's going on?" Jake took a deep breath and began to explain everything: Vivian's treatment of me, her sabotage of our careers, the humiliating party incident. Robert listened intently, his face growing darker with each revelation. Dad, Jake said hesitantly, what really happened between you and Mom? Why did you divorce? Robert's eyes clouded over with a mix of anger and sadness. It's a long story, son. One I'm not proud of. You see, I used to work for my father's company. Your mother was in the accounting department. I thought we were happy, but... He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. One day, the police showed up at the office. Your grandfather was arrested for tax evasion. It all happened so fast, the company was in chaos, and suddenly your mother was taking charge, saying she'd keep things running. Jake and I exchanged a glance, both thinking the same thing. This sounded awfully familiar. Robert continued. I had my suspicions. Your mother had access to all the financial records, and she'd been pushing for more control in the company for months. I confronted her, asked her if she had anything to do with framing your grandfather. She didn't deny it, Robert continued. Instead, she threatened me. I had an affair. It was brief, but your mother found out. She had evidence, photos, messages, everything. Jake and I exchanged a shocked glance as Robert continued, his voice heavy with regret. The woman I had the affair with, her husband was an incredibly influential man in our industry. Your mother threatened to tell him everything unless I did exactly as she said. She gave me an ultimatum, divorce her, give her everything, and stay away from you, or she'd destroy me completely. I'm ashamed to say I took the coward's way out. I thought I was protecting you, Jake. As we sat there, processing everything we'd learned, a memory suddenly hit me. Jake, I said urgently, remember when I first started at the agency? I noticed some discrepancies in the books. I even took some pictures, thinking I might need to bring it up to Vivian later. Jake's eyes widened. Pam, are you saying? I nodded. I think your mother might be doing the same thing she did to your grandfather. If we can prove it. After our revealing conversation with Robert at the cafe, we all decided to return to our apartment. As soon as we entered, I made a beeline for my laptop. Jake and Robert watched intently as I booted it up, their anticipation palpable. Here they are, I said, pulling up the folder containing the incriminating photos. Just as I remembered. Jake and Robert leaned in, their eyes widening as they took in the images on the screen. Clear as day, there was evidence of double-entry bookkeeping, one set of books for the tax authorities, and another showing the true state of the company's finances. Jake's face set in determination. We need to take this to the authorities right away. Mom can't keep getting away with this. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We contacted the tax authorities, presenting them with the evidence I had uncovered. They launched a full and in-depth audit of Vivian's agency. The investigation was thorough and relentless. The scale of tax evasion was staggering. Vivian was arrested and charged with multiple counts of tax evasion and fraud. The trial was swift, and the evidence overwhelming. In the end, the judge handed down a harsh sentence. Vivian would be spending several years in prison. In the aftermath of Vivian's conviction, the court decided to transfer ownership of the agency to Jake, as the closest family member not implicated in the crimes. It was a lot to take in, and we spent many late nights discussing what to do next. One evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset, Jake turned to me with a smile. You know, Pam, I've been thinking. This agency needs a fresh start, a new direction. And I can't think of anyone better to lead it than you. I stared at him in shock. Me? But Jake, He cut me off gently. You're brilliant, Pam. You saw what was happening when no one else did. You have the skills, the vision, and the integrity to turn this agency into something we can be proud of. What do you say? Will you be our new executive director? Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. After everything we'd been through, after all the times Vivian had tried to tear me down, here I was, being offered the chance to lead the very agency she had used to torment me. The next few months were busy as we restructured the agency. We implemented strict ethical guidelines, rebuilt client relationships, and created a work environment based on respect and creativity. Slowly but surely, the agency's reputation began to recover. Through it all, Robert was there, offering support and advice. Over time, the awkwardness faded, and we found ourselves enjoying Sunday dinners together, rebuilding the family bonds that Vivian had tried so hard to destroy.